From being as puny as a banana to being as tall as a skyscraper, the characters of Gumball come in many different shapes and sizes. So today, we're gonna find out how tall every Gumball character is, from smallest all the way up to the largest. Starting off, we have the show's shortest character, William. William is just a weird floating eyeball, so it's not surprising that he's tiny. But considering the fact that he's a 12-year-old boy who can use dark magic, I would have thought he would be a little bigger than 7.7 inches. How did we find this, you may be asking? Well, a user created a blog post on the Gumball wiki titled Approximating the Heights and Possible Weights of Characters. In this post, Pesron uses 3 different methods to find out the heights of characters: the Richard method, the object method, and the chimera method. The Richard method involves comparing all the heights of the characters to Richard, who is the only character in the show to have an exact canonical height of 6'4". The object method involves comparing all the characters to real-world inanimate objects like cars and lockers. And finally, the chimera method involves comparing all the characters to Chimera, which is that weird Lego brick shark dude creature that became Anais's friend and then dies. But it's said that Chimera is over 7 feet tall, which isn't an exact measurement like Richard's, but it can be approximated to around 7.5 feet. So he uses all 3 of these methods and creates an average. The heights of the characters in this blog post are wildly cited as the most accurate. But now that we have an accurate way of finding out these characters' heights, let's get back to the list with the second smallest character, Idaho. Idaho is a weird boy potato hybrid with a drawn-on face similar to William. So similar to William, you probably wouldn't expect him to be tall, but his height of 11.1 inches is actually taller than most potatoes, so maybe he could enter the potato basketball league. But now we have Anton, which is our first character on the list to be over a foot long, at 15 inches tall, which just about saves him from being turned into a foot-long sub at Subway. But moving on, we have Banana Joe. Banana Joe has actually changed heights throughout the show with his redesigns. At the beginning of the show, you may remember that Banana Joe looked a lot more like a real banana, but as the show went on, a lot of the characters that were made to look super realistic got more of an animated counterpart, including Banana Joe. This version actually made him look slightly taller, standing at a towering 1 foot 11 inches. This is one of the shortest characters in the entire show, but for a banana, he is a giant, with the average length of a banana being around 8 to 9 inches, but he can still be destroyed by the slam of a door.
I know, right? For the first time in my life, I'm actually early.
Anais is Gumball and Darwin's little sister, so you'd probably expect her to be smaller than them, but she's only a measly 2 foot 3 inches tall, which is shorter than a coffee table. For reference, she's only 4 years old, and the average height of a 4-year-old is around 2 foot 6, which is not as drastic as a difference as some of the other characters later in this list, but it still makes me wonder what is wrong with these guys. Well, unlike most of the citizens of Elmore, we actually do know what caused Anais's stunted height, because in the past, Gumball reveals that he hid rocks in Anais's pockets, which weighed her down so much that she wouldn't grow.
And I put stones in your pockets when you were a baby because I was scared you'd grow taller than me, which is why you're medically classified as a cephalopod. I think that's everything.
Gumball did this because he thought Anais would eventually grow taller than him, so he did the only logical thing, which was to cripple her growth, obviously. However, in the episode The Trumpet, we see that Anais, in Nicole's version of the future, does grow taller than even Nicole. So I guess Gumball attempts were ultimately useless. But now let's look at how tall Darwin is. Darwin is 10 years old, meaning that he should be around 4 foot 5, but he's actually only 2 foot 8. This means he's shorter than a yardstick and a golf putter. Hell, there's even some fire extinguishers that might mog him. Similar to Gumball, his height is super unevenly spread around his body. To get the obvious out of the way, Darwin doesn't have a body. So now this brings up all sorts of issues, like how does he eat food or poop? But what we're concerned with in this video is how this affects his height. If you look at Darwin compared to Gumball, you can see that his legs are longer than Gumball's torso, and legs combined. In fact, the only reason why Gumball is taller than Darwin is because his head is way bigger. Now, the reason why his legs are this long is actually because in the episode The Origins, the power of love between Gumball and Darwin is what made him get legs. I believe that this power was so strong that it made his legs unordinarily long. The reason why his head is so big, though, though, isn't explained. At first, Darwin was the size of a regular goldfish, but then, unexplainably, his head just sort of grew. The only thing I can think of as to why is because his head needed to store his newly grown legs. But now, let's continue with the main cat, Gumball. Throughout the show, Gumball has stayed 12 years old exactly. The average height of a 12-year-old is around 5 foot, but Gumball's height is significantly shorter, 3 foot, 3.5 inches tall. This is shorter than the average 5-year-old, and would mean that Gumball probably classifies as a dwarf. His head is even more strange, considering his head makes up about 50% of it, meaning that if he had a normal-sized head, he would be even shorter. He also has strange hips that stick out of his body, and he's blue, so his entire body is just messed up. And there's no canonical reason to any of the medical disorders that Gumball's facing, but many people have speculated on the reason why Gumball is short, and that's because, well, I mean, obviously he's a cat, but if we're to go off that, he would be like the Godzilla of cats, because the average height of a cat is only about 20 inches. So my theory is that he's a kind of human-cat hybrid, which would explain why he's shorter than a human, but taller than a cat. We're still in messy territory, as we have Principal Brown, who is only 3 foot 8 inches tall, which is the shortest adult man in Gumball that we've looked at so far. And in all honesty, this is quite impressive, seeing as how everyone in the show so far seems like they aren't tall enough to go to rides at Disneyland. But getting back to Principal Brown, he's actually based on a slug, which is interesting as he has flesh and nipples. But the average length of a slug is only around 3 inches, which is way shorter than Principal Brown. We were joking about Gumball being the Godzilla of cats, but seeing as we already have Mothra, why doesn't Principal Brown become Slugra? Penny is up next, and her height is weird. In all honesty, I'm not even really sure what Penny is. If you compare her to the average girl her age, she, like all the characters on this list so far, is quite short. However, she really isn't human. I'm pretty sure that she's supposed to be some sort of combination between a peanut and a unicorn with a light creature inside of them that can be turned into a dragon. But what makes her height so hard to pinpoint is that she has multiple different forms that she can turn into. The nothing form is literally small enough to be held in Gumball's hand, but her dragon form is taller than many buildings. She also has a difference in her shell form height as opposed to her out of shell height. So in order to clear up all the confusion, let's just go with her regular yellow out of shell form, which is exactly 4 feet tall. But now we have Nicole. She's 38 years old, so she should be around 5'3". But using the post that we mentioned earlier in the video, Nicole's height only comes out to 4'7". I was very surprised by this, seeing as Nicole apparently had a decorated history in competitive martial arts, which is extremely difficult to do if you're that short. For reference, the country with the shortest height on average for women is Guatemala, and their average is still 4'10", a whole 3 inches shorter than Nicole. I think a lot of it does have to do with her father being very short. But moving on from Nicole, we have Richard. We said previously that Richard is one of the only ones with exact canonical heights, with him being a staggering 6 foot 4 inches tall, which isn't that surprising, seeing as he towers over most characters in the show. So that's case closed, right? He's 6'4". Well, not exactly. If you remember, there are 2 other measures for heights of characters that we have to consider, that being them compared to other objects and being compared to Chimera. If you compare Richard to the streetlights and doors, you can see that he's nowhere close to 6'4", and he is significantly shorter than Chimera, who is 7'6". If Richard was 6'4", this wouldn't be the case. This, combined with the fact that Ben Boclet actually said that he's 6'2", puts Richard's height into question, leading the forum users' final calculation of Richard only being 5'4", which is a whole foot shorter than the original height stated. However, this means that Richard is the only person on this list so far that isn't significantly far off the average height of an adult male, which is 5'7". But next, we have Miss Simeon. Miss Simeon is based on an ape, which affects her height significantly, because this means she's always super slouched. Her height is 5 foot, but if I were to estimate without the slouch, she would be around 5'4". For the first time in this video, we actually have a character that's taller than the average height for all of the species they're based off of, as the height of the tallest ape is a gorilla and is only about 4'9", and she's actually based on a chimpanzee, which is only around 3'3" inches. She's also taller than the average woman at 5'3", so we have our first technically tall character in the show. But now let's move on to Sarah. Most people would expect that since she's an ice cream cone, she'd be pretty small, not even taking into account out the fact that she's literally melting half the time we see her. However, Sarah probably has the most realistic height out of everybody in the show so far, at 5 foot 10 inches tall. Sure, that's on the taller end, but I did not expect the most human-like height on this list to come from an ice cream character, especially since most ice cream cones are about 11 centimeters, or 4 inches. And these are the industrial ice cream cones, not the tiny little ice cream cones that are the size of your palm. The only thing that's odd is that Sarah is supposed to be only about 12 years old. So even though her height is fine for an adult woman, for a 12-year-old, she would be giant. However, I don't think she's gonna be growing anytime soon. But now we have a big one with Tina. Tina is an absolute giant. No one is denying that. But just how tall is she? In almost every appearance she's in, she's nearly touching the roof of the giant halls of Elmore Junior High. So using our method to calculate height, we find out that Tina is a whopping 7 foot 10 inches tall, making her by far the tallest of all the characters we've talked about so far. But in all honesty, even though she's very tall, I kinda expected her to be much taller, because there are humans in the real world that are that height. But what makes this even more disappointing is that the average height of a dinosaur is around 10 feet, and the average height of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, the species that Tina is 12 feet. However, her stunted growth could be because she's only around 12 years old, and the height of a dinosaur that age is still, it's still 10 feet tall. But if you want to see someone in the Rex family that is really tall, look no further than Mr. Rex, Tina's father. We see in the episode The Fight that his face alone is nearly as big as the entire dump. And in the episode The Quest, we see that he absolutely towers over Tina and the kids. But we only get to see a full shot of him in the episode The Routine, and we can see that he's absolutely massive, standing as tall as the warehouse buildings behind him. On average, the height of a warehouse is around 32 meters tall, meaning that Tina's dad is around 104 feet tall, making him easily the tallest character by far. But finally, we have the character we've all been waiting for, Hector. Now, you all know that Hector is Elmore's resident giant. He is so tall, in fact, that most of the time, his face doesn't appear on screen. Now, the tallest character we've seen so far is Mr. Rex, who is about 104 feet tall. So let's see if Hector has him beat. For all of the other characters, we've been looking at Pesron's blog entry, but for Hector, it's not going to be that easy, as Pesron has a range of values listed, similar to Miss Simeon. In a lot of Hector's appearances, he's slouching like a monkey, even though in other appearances, he stands totally upright. I think the best appearance to go off of is in the episode The Colossus, specifically the scene where he destroys the entire town. I think the reason why this episode is the best is because this scene is replicated in the episode The Finale. Furthermore, it's the most reliable. So in The Colossus, Gumball and Darwin try to get Hector out of his shell and get him to engage in more fun activities, but to no success. So they call Hector boring, which makes him chimp out, literally, and he turns into a mad ape, destroying the entire town. Here, we actually get to see a full body perspective of Hector. Usually, we only get to see Hector's feet or a part of his body, but in this range, we get to see multiple shots of his full body. However, he's moving super erratically, and there's nothing to scale his body. I thought all hope was lost until the end of the scene when Gumball calms Hector down, and he falls face first into the football field. Gumball goes to talk to Hector and apologizes, but just when Miss Yodatham and Darwin come, we get a blink you'll miss it frame of Hector's body perfectly spread across the football field. As you can see in this frame, his toe starts at the end of the end zone, and the top of his head ends at the other end of the end zone. Taking into account the position of his body, we can say that Hector is around 90 yards, or 207 feet long, nearly triple the height of Mr. Rex. Hector is so tall that it would take more than 50 people standing on top of one another to be as tall as him, and that's how tall every Gumball character is. But because you made it this far, make sure to go down and subscribe, and while you're still here, click the video on screen. I'm sure you'll love it.